according to Zoom, we're live streaming. According to
Well,
YouTube, we're preparing. I don't know. Maybe we're live. Done. We're
there.
live.
This will be our cold open forever, I think.
I think
Just
so.
yeah, this is just going to be how we start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Folk Music Educator podcast. My name is Phil Kramer.
And I'm Erin May Lewis. And
And
the Folk Music Educator podcast is hosted by us. And we talk about being folk music educators in the sort of online
space.
sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New media, I think it's technically called,
Oh, yes.
which is
hmm
so pretentious, but I love it.
It is new media. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly having conversations with people about how we use technology and which ways of using it are helpful and which ways of using it are harmful, and how do we know that? And do we need to regroup and change a way that we thought it was helpful, but maybe it's not as helpful as we thought it was, or maybe it was helpful for a season and now it's not as helpful? And yes, so
It's
new media it is.
always adapting. And I have to remind myself that it feels like it changes a lot, but I'm like remembering like people like Kenny Baker were like, oh yeah, like radio when I was a kid was awesome. We could hear other fiddle players from across the country. And then by the time like he was getting older, I believe he was making homespun videos and all that good stuff. And like,
Right, right.
man, feeling so connected. And now we can be in person and it's great.
hmm
If I could ever talk them into it, I could be taking lessons with like Buddy Spiker or something. That's so exciting.
Right. And they're like, we are face to face, even though we are geographically separated. And there's something that's really, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Exactly. But with new technologies, it also means new opportunities and unintended consequences and side effects and all these things. Because when you, I don't know about you, but when you are creating a teaching space or a work from home space for a traditional kind of teaching environment, there's some things that you kind of have to create and create systems and all that kind of stuff. And then, like, for instance, like, hey, where are people going to sit during, like, while their kiddos or their spouses are taking lessons or something? Is the place that you're going to be teaching have adequate parking? What is all of the things? What's everything going to go online?
Mhm.
With online teaching, it's like, oh no, not only do I need to prepare my studio in lighting setups and digital workflows, how am I going to do my file management? How am I going to do all of these things? It's like, oh, there's a lot. It turns into a thing. And for us who um I don't know about you, if we could do traditional working um options, we would probably be doing it. I am neurodivergent. That is why I am here.
Yeah, I've never had like a regular job. I don't, the
Yeah,
closest I got to a regular job probably was waitressing
yeah.
at a fancy little tea house, which is not even normal waitressing. So
I've done a couple. I
uh,
sold diamonds with for Zales, the diamond store. I was a telemark, not a. I was an online website support specialist for USAA, and I sold Apple computers for I did a whole bunch of stuff.
mhm.
But there's a reason I don't do that no more, and I teach banjo.
Uh-huh. Oh,
But that
yeah.
kind of brings us to a thing because I don't know about you, friends. Like when I started doing this, I went out of my way to start researching to other people talking about it. How are they running their business? How are they
Mhm.
doing all these things? And while there was a lot of advice to be had, a lot of the advice ended up kind of being, oh, what you just need to do is get up at 5:30, keep a journal, um, and take my
Here's a
course.
step by step.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Here's my course on how to become a millionaire in 30 days, which was all the things of no want, not what. And so a lot of
And
it.
and then you wrote to me and you were like, "Do you have any advice?" And I was like, "Well, let's have a Zoom meeting and I'll tell you everything I know." And it's not a lot, and most of it is like, "Well, you probably gonna have to figure that out for yourself to determine what works for you." And then we started a podcast.
Then we started a podcast, and it's been
And
fun
the
ever
moral of the
since.
podcast is mostly, well, you're probably going to have to try some things and see what works for you. But here's a way that this has been successful for me, and here's why I think it's been successful for me. And it's not because it is the right way to do it. It's just because it's the way that's working for me.
I think that's kind of the biggest trick is I've noticed that most of the time the one size fits all solution for most things ends up being the one size that kind of feels mildly uncomfortable to everyone wearing it. it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
You
not
know, we've talked some about creating courses and like this idea that we both teach online and we both have a lot of experience doing this, and there is a way of creating a different kind of accessibility if you create pre-recorded courses as opposed to at this time in this way the thing is happening. And
exactly.
there's a different kind of demographic of students that can be reached in that way, and so like maybe there would be some value in creating these courses. So I went to a like free webinar that was supposed to be about how to create courses, and I sat through it for an hour, and at the end of it I was like, yeah, no, the only way to create a course is to just figure out what works for me and do it. And I know that, and sometimes I just have to go to a thing where they're like telling you the like checklist of things you're supposed to do before you're prepared to create a course, and be like, yeah, no, I don't need that kind of a checklist. I need to figure out how my own brain works and who my own target audience is. This idea of creating like a universal thing that's going to be for everyone, it's not helpful, but it's always it's the first place my brain tries to go is like, how do I make one thing that works for everyone I know? And then I realize there isn't one thing that works for everyone I know. So how do I create a thing that works for me? Or how do I create a thing that works for a small segment of people? And I don't know. Yeah.
And I think that's I think that is a struggle that I have had that finally had a turnkey moment for me because I I think about making a product. I want to make a product, and my brain immediately goes to that. How is this something I can industrialize? I can
Right.
mass market. I can just put out to the world, and
Hmm.
people can interact with. And one, I think it ends up being kind of wasteful a lot of time if we take a look of like, oh, they make 4 million Nike shoes and you know 2.6 million of them end up in landfills, but they still made a profit because they had to make so much.
Hmm.
and um it ends up being like you make something with a scattershot approach and hope that enough people have made the work that you did profitable
Hmm.
versus a gift kind of idea. You like you don't tend to make a gift for 4,000 people. You might make
Right.
a gift for anywhere between 1 to 15 people if you're making a big batch of jam or something. And that is so much more useful to determine and like what those things are. And so for a lot of the time I'm like, what would be something that I needed that I would have loved to receive as a gift or as a
Hmm.
helping hand when I was learning this. And
Hmm.
then that started to help and started to push it. And um I think that's been one of the ways that I'm trying to build that next chapter of my little career path here is like how do I use music as a more of a vehicle for the things that I value and like community building and mutual aid and just
Hmm.
that those happy go social feelings versus, oh, how can I be a brand? Or I
Hmm.
don't know. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
being a little too hoity toity for a business podcast.
I am coming back around to just thinking about like what are the core values. um, and I have talked sometimes about how I feel like one of my kind of superpowers in the way I've like run my business is that I'm not running my business based on these like external markers of success, like this class had X number of people or this event made X number of dollars. But I have a set of core values that are important to me. And one of the values is that I can sustain and support a life and, not be hungry. That's
Yeah.
that's in the list. But I also have values of supporting other people's musical creative expression and values of building a community and values of like networking and helping connect people to each other. And there are events and strategies and things that 2 years ago were working great, and now it's not necessarily the same thing anymore. And
Yeah.
so then it's like, well, I may need to make some pivots and change some things. And is always a part of me that every time something doesn't go as big or beautiful or that external marker of success as the last time I did it or some other event or some whatever, then I can start to get really down on myself for not hitting that benchmark. But then if I can step back and say, did that event meet those core values? Or what's a way I can take my values and shift it into a different kind of event? And then I'm not losing that kind of grounded part of me, but the grounded part of me isn't just trying to have the biggest, brightest, best, most sales, whatever. Like that chase after the shiny sparkly thing that is sort of an enigma, it doesn't feel like how I want to live my life.
And I completely agree with you. And for me, I think for anyone who's just kind of tuning in and just kind of going, okay, yeah, like this might be the first time listening into the podcast to go, okay, I'm liking the vibe that we're going. How is
Who
this?
are these people?
Who are these people? But how does it like? What does this mean for when it comes to building my own systems? How do we translate those values into these things? And I think one of the approaches that I've had is just being honest with myself on the realistic, not necessarily output, but procedure that my brain works with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I could technically go out and track down, whether it's by purchasing and returning or researching or chatting, all these things, find a whole bunch of books that are going to teach exactly the concepts that I want to teach and all these
Yeah.
things and go, this is it. These are the core sets of curricula that I use.
Right.
And every student that signs up for Clawhammer lessons is going to start with book one. You can purchase it on my website, and we will work through book one. We,
Right.
we, we will work with, then you'll purchase book two and we'll go. And then eventually we'll get to the end of book 4 or 5, and we either find a new book to purchase or you go off into the real world and find your next student, like your next teacher, because that's the only thing that I do. And I think that's a very viable way for a lot of people to teach if their brain is like, I cannot dedicate this. And for me, I had to be real with myself. I was like, if I was teaching the same 4 books for 2 years, let alone 20 years,
Yeah, right.
that would just be so stifling for my own creativity. And so
Hmm.
technically, it was so much harder for my brain to go and learn how to use MuseScore or Table Edit or Finale or all of these like
Right.
systems,
Right.
but then it was to just go track down 4 or 5 books. But
Hmm.
now I have these skill sets to when a student shows up and goes, I want to have the Bach G minor, like the Gigue for solo violin, but I want to adapt it for the get banjo. I'm like, okay, let's figure it out and we can do it versus
Yeah.
these other systems. And so it's not, I don't want people to think like, oh, finding your own way means finding the lazy way to do something. Finding your way is finding the novel way for your brain to actually accomplish the goal that you want to accomplish.
Yeah, and
The
I
path of least resistance.
right. Like I have a small like pushback against the word lazy in part because like that was a lot of my kind of childhood narrative because I do things differently than some other people and
Yeah,
and it can look like lazy if again if you're comparing to certain sets of like
yeah,
external check marks, right? But I'm always telling my students like it's not lazy to find the resources that are most helpful to you and then dig into them and use them, right? It's not cheating if you go look up how to do a thing and it makes sense in your brain and then you follow that strategy. That's not cheating. That's actually using your resources really well. And this idea of like f- for me there's this one part of my brain that thinks like well just finding a book and teaching it is would be lazy
mhm,
because the way I teach tends to be more like the way you teach. Um, but it would also not work for me, just like you're saying. Like, it wouldn't be the lazy approach for me to just
yeah.
work through a book. It would be the soul-sucking approach for me to just work through a book, right? It would
Oh
be
no.
the unhelpful way. But you were talking about like what would have been the greatest gift, and I realized that I got one of those like greatest gifts because when I was kind of finding my own footing as a dulcimer player and expressing myself and beginning to come up with my own arrangements, there was another dulcimer teacher who handed me at that time, I think it was a CD, like a disc burned of like his whole table edit library. And he was like, instead of you having to start from scratch learning how to use the software and input the like simple
Yeah.
melodies into the software, start with this, take these files, and then use them to create your next thing. That was an incredible gift because it gave me exactly that. It was like the template for creating my own thing. And when I think about like how it feels like every single teacher shouldn't have to like reinvent the wheel. Every single teacher shouldn't have to tab out old Joe Clark. We could just all agree that we're going to use whatever XYZ version of old Joe Clark. But also over time, I've wanted to take old Joe Clark and then do this variation. And then I want to take old Joe Clark and teach it this way. So I do have that file. So like maybe the gift that could be available is like here's those core files, go ahead and take them and use them, and like here's a portfolio of simple teaching files that it and I never even had thought about that until you were talking about that whole process. It's like right, a book of tunes or a book of arrangements or whatever, it meets a need, but there's a lot of people who are more like us who just need that starting point of how do you have a foundation upon which to build then your own style. So now I'm thinking about that.
No, I feel so honored that I was able to give that because that's exactly how my
That's
brain
why I
thinks.
love collaboration because we just come up with creative things that we wouldn't come up with we get in our own circle of thinking about things the same way over and over again, and we can't
Yeah.
find the like what's slightly outside the box sometimes until we talk to someone else and they go, "Oh yeah, I work outside the box like this." And then you go, "Oh, outside the box is available."
Oh yeah. And like it's amazing how often the favorite things that we receive, the favorite resources that we have, all these things are not the most widespread things. Like I know for fiddle players, one of the most universally known but also controversial resources is the Fiddler's Fake Book.
I
It
learned a lot of tunes on the Mountain Dulcimer from the Fiddler's Fake Book.
exactly, and every fiddler is going to have like the caveat conversation of, okay, I use it, but here's the reasons why it stinks. Like,
Uh-huh.
and everyone goes like, no, it's terrible. We shouldn't be using it. But this is why mine has coffee stains all over it, and it's a vital part of my creative
Oh yeah,
process.
for sure. And at the time it was written, it was the first resource of that kind available. So of course it's really important.
Yeah, yeah.
And of
Um,
course the approach to some of those tunes or presentation of things has been refined since
oh
the
yeah.
first one.
Oh yeah. You can adapt.
Uh-huh.
And it's always
Uh-huh.
funny because like for me, I always tell folks, I'm like, they're trying to make a gross approximation of all of the different versions of Soldier's Joy from all
Hmm.
of the different genres and subgenres and regions of this music and turn it into one single entry in this book. It's an impossible task.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, but then you have, I mean, like the opposite approach was like the Francis Childs ballads.
mhm,
And under each ballad, you would sometimes have 12 or 13 variations of the same ballad. And like, who's gonna look through all of those and then, like pick one
yes,
is good enough, right? But
exactly.
there are different kinds of ways of processing it. Because if you had handed all of us when we were like middle school, high school age, and the Fiddler's Fake Book is the gift that you're given, and it's got all the tunes in it, and it had 47 versions of Soldier's Joy, we all would have just shut it again. It
Oh
was
yeah.
because there was one way of playing Soldier's Joy, and then we could learn it, and then we would know the tune now.
Uh,
That made it such a valuable resource, also.
I remember going to a jazz camp when I was 15, 14, 15, somewhere around that era, that age. And I brought my real book with me, the jazz real book. And
Yep.
jazz folks will give so much shade to that book for the same reasons that we're talking about here. But
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons is they didn't really use like teach it in a way that was useful because what was nice is that like one night all of the kids that were kind of in the rhythm sections or the most more advanced part of the thing we went to the big part, the lodge, and we were all jamming. We were using these books to read out of. We were just going and reading these
Yeah.
tunes and making arrangements on the fly. And what was interesting is that before or after or during us playing, we would sometimes stop and go, "What are you playing there?" And they go, "Oh, this is the notes that my teacher talked about," and all these things. And all of these teachers had filled out all of these resources, like these tricks, like these chord substitutions, these revamps, and all
Right.
these things. And
Right.
all these kids then were in a collaborative effort together, creating a system that worked. It did activate that arranging part of their brain. They're all working together. They're
Mhm.
doing those things. And I'm like, oh,
Because the
so
book
that
provides a starting point that's solid enough that we can meet there.
exactly. And
Hmm.
I think it's trying to find the metaphor to bring that all in. I think it can really feel like if we are not fulfilling the Instagram perfect aesthetic or goals for our business,
Mhm,
that if we're not hosting a camp this summer, if we're not finding
mhm.
those 600, six-figure salary options on how to do things, that it can really feel like we're leaving on money on the table, like we're not leading up to our potential, that we're not our best selves.
Right. I'm not
I would,
hustling enough. I'm not hustling enough.
oh yeah. And at the end of the day, I'm like, I would much rather be my favorite self than my best self. And
Mm.
yeah,
Oh,
I like,
I like that.
there's so many, like, it's not about finding the perfect way of doing this. And it's not about the way of finding it's good enough. Good enough sounds like, oh, you're deliberately undershooting for the sake of ease. It's about finding the system that works for you.
Mhm,
It goes,
mhm.
I could be going way over. I do recognize that there's a wage that I can accomplish that would really undercut a whole lot of work and a whole lot of hassle.
Yeah.
But finding the system that works for you. If
Mhm.
you
Right. There
if
are some things that I put a lot of work into
yeah,
because I love it and I love seeing the outcome. And there are other things that I'm just like, yeah, that's not going to be me. I'm not the teacher to do that. I, I'm sure
technically,
someone out there would put all the work in this direction, and that's not me. I'm not that one.
as much as it is it amazing when I see a professional musician that has the iPad just perfectly set up with every score on the planet that they need, and it's just there at their fingertips, and it's great. That sounds like a file management nightmare. I could never do that in 1,000 years. And then I see the um the little old ladies that are like, I have a binder that is 9 inches thick with photocopies of every tune I've ever found, and I'm also go equally panic.
A nightmare.
But it is
Equally a
so
nightmare. You should see my desk. There's just individual pieces of sheet music laying everywhere. That's definitely better.
it's so much better, and it's just like you need to fi- find the one that works for me. Be your favorite self. You know.
Yes. Yep.
So yeah,
Keep trying.
that's how I
Keep.
feel about things today.
I like it.
Well, yeah.
Well,
Well,
I love having these conversations with you because they are always sort of meandering in these delightful, creative ways that leave me thinking. And now I'm gonna go because I have
go teach.
the after school music program that I have been working with a little garage band of third and fourth graders. They have their final concert this afternoon, and
That's
so
adorable.
they are really adorable.
Well,
Maybe I should say the little teaching win I had with them on the podcast. I was telling you about it before we started recording, but my little teaching win was that we've been working on improvisation for the whole semester.
yeah,
And the drummer is really has taken lessons and is really good at drumming, but we were trying to encourage him to also learn the pitches of the pentatonic scale and do improvisation with
yeah,
melodic ideas and not just rhythmic ideas. And so he's been playing sometimes like the bells or the mallet percussion things, and sometimes the piano. And so a week ago, we were having our second to last rehearsal and suggested that he play the piano for the performance of this. And he got really just shy about it, I think, feeling not confident, and said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to play drums. So last week, his whole rehearsal was drums. And then this week, when we came in for the very last rehearsal, he was sort of like expressing disappointment in himself for not being able to play the piano. So I asked him if he would want to try one more time to play the piano. And he was like, yeah, but I don't know how to make it sound good. And so I had this one tiny little teacher light bulb moment that makes, it's like the moment when you feel like I really do know what I'm doing. I really am a teacher. And I helped him break down the pentatonic scale, which is a 5 note pattern, into 3 note patterns. And I showed him a way he could kind of play with 3 notes at a time and then shift it by 1 note up and down the scale. And he was so excited. So he's playing piano in the concert
Oh,
today. I'm very
that's
proud of him.
so exciting. That's going to be, well, we always love teacher wins. I
Yeah,
Maybe that's one of those goals we can have in the future is having a teacher win of the
a
week at the end.
teacher win. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
teacher wins.
I love
And
it.
next time I talk to you, I want to hear about the contra dance you're doing this weekend.
Yes, the contra dance will be fun. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We are the Folk Music Educator Podcast. My lovely co-host is Erin May Lewis. And do you just do Erin May? Did I remember?
Yeah, my like business stuff is all under Aaron May.
Okay, great. And then I am Phil Kramer, and you can find us everywhere where your social media needs are sold. And
That's right. We are on the internet.
we are on the internet, and we're excited to keep doing this. So yeah,
Yeah,
have a great
thanks
week,
for hanging out
everybody.
today. See ya. Bye.
Bye.